When we are married, will you dance with me? I find dancing very agreeable. Why can you not say what is in your head?
Why can you not stop saying what is in yours? Why must you lead when I want to lead? If I want to dance, I will ask you to dance. If I want to speak, I will open my mouth and speak. Everyone is forever plaguing me to speak further. Why? What good is it to tell you that you are in my every thought from the time I wake? What good can come from my saying that I sometimes cannot think clearly or do my work properly? What gain can rise of my telling you the only time I feel fear as others do is when I think of you in harm? That is why I'm on this porch, Ivy Walker. I fear for your safety before all others. And yes, I will dance with you on our wedding night. Welcome to Your Pick, a film podcast. I'm Geneva.
And I'm Tatum.
We are two friends who love movies and love sharing them with each other. Each week, we take turns picking a film that is close to our hearts and talk about why it moves us, to tears, to laughter, and everything in between. We celebrate the craft of filmmaking, as well as the unique and personal ways we find meaning in the movies we watch. First of all, can you appreciate that I chose a quote that I feel like speaks to me sometimes?
Speaks to you?
Speaks a little bit to me. At least me in school, when people are like, you need to talk more. You need to speak up. And I'm like, if I wanted to talk, I would talk.
That is so interesting because that is not my takeaway from this quote.
Interesting.
Anyway.
You wanted to, so we just, listeners, we just recorded a 2-hour plus episode catching ourselves up on what we've been watching the last 6 months or so. So we're a little bit talked out on that topic, but there is one additional movie that Tatum and I each wanted to mention, recent movies. So Tatum, why don't you go first?
Yes, I did not want to mention this in our extensive what we've been watching episode because I really wanted to highlight this film. It's my favorite of the year so far. It is called The Substance. I don't know if this is a movie that's only really well known by film nerd people or if it's kind of well known at large. But it is a psychological body horror film starring Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. I always forget how to say her name. And it is directed by, I always forget how to say her name. So I'm going to look up how it's spelled. It's directed by Coralie Fargo, because it's French. So Coralie Fargo, I think. This is not her first film, but this is her first film to really make it big. I wanted to just talk about this on its own because it really is a special kind of unique film in and of itself. It follows Demi Moore's character, and the whole premise is that she is this famous actress who hits the age of 50, and she was always this young, fit lady, and she's teaching this yoga class, but she's really hot in the yoga class. It's like, come on, ladies, let's go do that stretch. And
very Jane Fonda.
Yes, but she's very talented, very fit, all of those things. And obviously Demi Moore is stunning, incredible. And she's 50 in this movie, but in real life she's 61, which is insane.
She's 61? Are you 61. Serious?
She's 61, yeah. But so in this movie, it's kind of about, she hits the age of 50 and the, kind of the production company that she works for essentially kicks her out. They're like, yeah, you're too old. You can't do this anymore. We need someone younger, someone fresh, someone beautiful, someone whatever. And this kind of destroys her because she's like, I'm very good at my job, but because I'm not fitting your beauty standards, I therefore don't really have a place in this world anymore. And so she gets very depressed, and then she stumbles upon this kind of contraband medication called The Substance that's very underground. Only a few people have access to it. And it's basically you inject yourself with this substance and you create another version of yourself that is way younger and more quote, beautiful. And so you have to spend 1 week in each body, and you have to switch from one body to the other every 7 days. And if you don't do that, problems come about and a lot of issues ensue after that. And so I've never seen anything like it. The body horror is shocking. I've never really been a body horror person, but this one in particular, it handles it very, very well. The body horror is so intentional and well done, and just really intense and frightening in a way that really makes you, question. We all question this. We all know this is reality, but it really makes you look very closely at the beauty standards and like what lengths people are willing to go to maintain what society deems as like, beauty. And she just goes deeper and deeper into things. I really don't want to spoil anything, but it gets more and more and more crazy as she gets more and more and more addicted to being younger. And every step of the way, like, she can call this phone number of these people who run this company and give them the substance or whatever. She can call them and complain about what's happening. And every single time they ask her, like, do you want to stop? You can stop. We can give you the directions and the process on how to stop. And so it literally is her continuing to stay in this area of using this substance, even though she has the option to leave. But it also has this commentary on, like, yes, she's following these beauty standards because she herself can't see value in herself at the age she is now. But also that's not strictly coming from her. That's also coming from like all of the white men in power that are telling her what she's worth and how she's not worth anything anymore. And then when she's the younger version of herself, she's treated like royalty. So yeah, as time goes on, it gets more and more and more grotesque and just, by the end, it is absolutely insane, very unexpected, so well earned what it does at the end. A lesser movie would not have earned the direction that it goes, because it would feel kind of like oh, okay, of course you're going to end it that way. But this movie really earns it, and it's just shocking. I've never seen anything like this. I went in and I was terrified. I was like, oh my gosh, like, am I going to have to leave the theater? Is it going to be like too much or whatever? I cannot wait to watch this movie again. It's I think 2.5 hours. It felt like 30 minutes. It flows so well. It is supremely acted, phenomenally directed. It doesn't really have a score aside from like the substance theme that's like a wow wow wow. Like it's a really really phenomenal film. It's my number one of the year. I really hope that more people see it if they can stomach it. If anyone listening to this is like, I'm kind of interested, but I'm not really sure, watch it anyway. The only reason you shouldn't watch it is if you know with 100% certainty I cannot handle it. But if you're a little bit on the fence, highly recommend watching it. You can always turn it off. You can always leave the theater. But it is something where I'm very appreciative that I saw it in the theater, because it is so shocking that being in a room full of 100+ people that are all just as shocked as you are, and you can look around and see everyone with their mouths agape and like hands over their faces and people shocked, it's very, very powerful. It's very entertaining. It's also very profound in terms of its themes. Dennis Quaid gives the performance of a lifetime. Demi Moore also, like, absolutely incredible performance. One of her best, if not her best. And Margaret Qualley, like, so glad she's coming up and just getting more and more juicy roles that kind of are like showing us more of what she can do, as opposed to just like this young girl who but anyway, that is The Substance. Again, if you're even on the fence, watch it. It's so worth it. It's so good. That's The Substance.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds so good. Unfortunately, as I've already discussed with Tatum, I am one of those people who is not on the fence. I know with 100% certainty I would not be able to handle it, because I cannot do body horror, and I specifically cannot do needles.
Lots of needles in the movie.
But I've heard great things about this movie, and I can't wait to see clips of the less terrifying parts.
I really hope it gets some awards love. I really do.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, support female filmmakers who have very distinct visions and are able to make movies with women, you know, talking about topics that are relevant to women's rights and women's roles in society. Yeah. Very excited that it exists.
Also, let's give some respect to quality horror films. Awards never do that. They never, it's so rare that I'm like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Can this please be the next Get Out? Like, can this be a horror movie that breaks through? Because it deserves it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Oh, I wanted to mention, because I didn't mention this in our extended What Have We Been Watching movie. One recent movie that I've seen that I'm not as passionate about as Tatum is about the substance, but I did really enjoy and is relevant to the topic of this episode, is Trap, which is the newest film from M. Night Shyamalan, starring Josh Hartnett. And the premise...
Did M. Night Shyamalan released 2 movies this year? Didn't he also have Knock at the Cabin or something?
I feel like Knock at the Cabin was last year.
Okay.
But if it was this year, it was early this year.
Okay.
But I think it was last year. But yeah, you know, he's pretty prolific these days. Trap has just an insanely great premise, which is basically, what if a Taylor Swift concert was a trap to catch a serial killer?
What?
So basically the idea is Josh Hartnett is like a middle-aged dad who's taking his, you know, like 12, 13-year-old daughter to a concert for her favorite pop star, who's this pop star named Lady Raven, who is played in the film by M. Night Shyamalan's real-life daughter.
Oh, I thought you were going to say she's played by Taylor Swift. I was like, wow. Okay.
That would be amazing. And what we find out, so first he's like looking around and he keeps noticing things. He notices that like there's all these cops who are stationed around, like more than would be normal for even like a big concert like this. And just like security's really tight. They're really cracking down on like who's coming in, who's coming out. And so finally he gets into this conversation with one of the service workers at the concert venue. And what he finds out is that the police have somehow found out that a serial killer called the Butcher is going to be at this concert. And so they've locked down the whole concert and they're checking the IDs of everyone who goes out so that they can hopefully catch the Butcher.
This is crazy.
But then what we find out, and this is not a spoiler because this is in the trailer, is that Josh Hartnett is the Butcher. The dad, who's the main character, is the serial killer. And so most of the movie is him trying to put on this, you know, persona of, you know, maintain his persona of being a good dad for his daughter, who seems like a really sweet kid, but then also trying to figure out how to get around the system, how to sneak out without people knowing, how to, like, you know, make sure that he's not caught. And when I tell you, Josh Hartnett is so good in this movie, and he so fully understands what Shyamalan is going for, which is, this movie is camp. It is really funny. It's tense, but it's also hilarious. And the over-the-top, like, hey, I'm just a normal guy. Like, how are you doing? Hey, why don't you tell me everything you know about the security measures around here? Like this, everything that he does is just so funny. And, yeah, I really, really enjoyed this movie. I feel like people who don't understand the tone that he's going for were a bit more mixed on it, but I think you have to understand that he is, if something strikes you as weird, if people are not talking like human beings, I mean, that's kind of an M. Night Shyamalan standard. Like, none of his characters talk like human beings. But that's just, like, his tone and his style, you know? And he knows it's funny. And he's making a movie about that. He's making the movie about how do you be a girl dad when you're also, like, a monster? And it's great. I would recommend. It was super fun. So.
All right.
M. Night Shyamalan. All right, so today on the show, speaking of which, we are discussing The Village from 2004, which was written and directed by M. Night Shyamalan, starring Bryce Dallas Howard, Joaquin Phoenix, Sigourney Weaver, and a whole lot of other people. This cast is really stacked, including, fun fact, M. Night Shyamalan, because he always has a cameo in his own movies.
I laughed so hard.
Yeah, I know.
I was like, of course.
Of course. There he is. The village centers on a small farming community in the 19th century. The elders of the village have a long-standing truce with the creatures who inhabit the surrounding forest, who they refer to as those we don't speak of. The villagers don't go into the forest, and the creatures don't go into the village. However, because of this truce, the village has been isolated from the outside world for decades. Most of the villagers are terrified of incurring the creature's wrath, but when several small children start to sicken and die from lack of medicine, one of the younger men in the village, named Lucius Hunt, starts asking for permission to pass through the forest and bring back supplies. Then, the bodies of animals who've been killed and skinned start showing up all over town, and the villagers begin to worry that the truce is coming to an end. When a horrific crime occurs, it falls to Ivy Walker, the fiercely independent blind woman who Lucius loves, to face her fears and discover the secrets of the forest. So, this movie, just a couple quick facts. The score for this movie is by James Newton Howard, who's a composer I really like. I really like the score for this movie. I think it's beautiful. The cinematography, Roger Deakins, the GOAT, looks great. M. Night Shyamalan, of course, is a Philadelphia king. He is from the Philadelphia area. A lot of his movies have been shot in Pennsylvania. This movie in particular, the whole village set, it was like built as one giant set in Chadds Ford, PA, which is close to the Delaware border. Fun fact, just for my own life, because M. Night Shyamalan's from the Philadelphia area, I've seen him in attending like community theater productions near me, and I actually saw a production that his daughter, I think it was Salika, the woman who plays the pop star in Trap. I saw a play that she did where she played the main character, and she was very good. Let's see. So just context-wise, this movie is pretty controversial within M. Night Shyamalan's career. Obviously, he had a lot of success early in his career, with The Sixth Sense being his breakout hit, got Oscar nominations, great movie, everyone loves it. Unbreakable and Signs both had a lot of critical love and commercial success. The Village was commercially pretty successful, but this is kind of the point where people started to turn on him. There were a lot of mixed reactions to this movie. And it was the movie that he made before he really started the worst period of his career. You know, he was doing Late in the Water, where he was doing Avatar, The Happening, you know, just some
Avatar,
really, really
the
dire
last
movies.
Airbender, by the way.
Oh, yes, thank you. Not James Cameron's Avatar.
No. And also a live action version of Avatar: The Last Airbender, not the cartoon,
not the excellent animated
incredible.
film. Yeah. So this movie has sometimes gotten lumped in with those other movies. I disagree with that, and I think since in the more recent years, there's been a lot of reappraisal of this movie. I've linked to two down below to two essays by film writers discussing, you know, how this movie was maybe misinterpreted at the time and deserves another look, which I agree with. I liked it at the time, although I was only like, 13 or so when I saw it. I was too young to see it in theaters, but I think my parents saw it. They thought, yeah, she can probably handle this, and so they showed this to me. At the time, this is probably the scariest movie I've ever seen, which it's not a very scary movie. But yeah, I liked it at the time, and it's not a movie that I rewatch super frequently, but each time I do, I'm like, all right, yeah, I think this is a solid movie. And for whatever reason, it's probably because it's the first one of his that I saw. It's the one that I've connected to the most out of all the films of his that I've seen. There's a lot of his films that I haven't seen. But anyway, with all of that, what is your relationship first to M. Night Shyamalan's movies? Are you generally pro, anti, mixed? And then what did you think of this movie?
I am not really an M. Night Shyamalan fan. The first movie I ever saw of his was Signs, because it was on the TV all the time when I was little. I remember liking it, but also I was very young and I have not watched it again since then. So maybe if I were to rewatch it, it would have more of an impact on me. I also watched The Sixth Sense for the first time a few years back and didn't like it.
You didn't like this? Wait,
I did not like it.
I don't think we talked about this.
I think that is because I went in with very high expectations because I had heard the reputation of the movie. And so, and also, like, I already knew what the twist was,
right.
like, I don't know. It just, also, I'm not really the biggest fan of Bruce Willis. Like, it just did not work for me. And it was something where I was like, I'm sure I would appreciate it more if I watched it again, but also I wasn't confident enough that I would really, really love it to think it worth the time to watch it again. But I'm also very aware that I am in the minority. A lot of people, probably majority of people, like, really love that film. But it just was not particularly impactful for me. I've seen a handful of his other films. The only one that I find tolerable is Split. Because
that's one I haven't seen, but I really want to.
Yeah, I mean, the cast is very good. I love James McAvoy. It was interesting to see him in that role. For me, that was an introduction to Anya Taylor-Joy, and Haley Lou Richardson when she was kind of earlier on in her career. But that movie kind of went a little bit too much for me at the end. I find a lot of his movies, the twists just don't work for me. I don't know. Particularly in this movie, I was like, yeah, I already knew that, so I'm not surprised even in the slightest. So, which I think is like a lot of the reason why people are drawn to his movies. They're like, what's the twist gonna be? And they just never really seem to be that interesting to me. But anyway, that's kind of my relationship to M. Night Shyamalan. I'm just not really a fan of any of his movies that I've seen. But I also just think, like, his style is not for me. The twists don't work. I don't like how his characters speak. I don't like, maybe that's why I like Split the most, because the characters talk like real people in that to a certain extent. But yeah, I don't know. Just not the biggest fan of his stuff.
No, that's understandable. I feel like he is one of those, I mean, with any director who has a very distinct sense of style, you're going to like it or it's not going to work for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And his just doesn't work for me. So going to this movie specifically, I don't, honestly, I thought this while I was watching the movie, and I was like, that might be an overstatement. But now that I think about it, I don't think it's an overstatement. This might be one of the most beautiful, like, visually beautiful films I've seen in my life. Like, Roger Deakins, as you said, like, GOAT, obviously. But, like, I cannot believe he went so hard on a movie this mediocre, in my opinion. Like I'm like, Roger Deakins, you deserve so much better. But this movie is visually stunning. I mean, it almost looks like it was shot on film. I don't know if it was.
I don't know, but it might have been. I mean, it was 2004. I don't think it was quite as uncommon.
Yeah,
especially for someone of that the stature, you know, the people involved.
Yeah, I love it. It looks like it's shot on film to me, and even if it's not, I love however they got that look. I think the color palette and the color correction is so, it's like muted but also really vibrant at the same time. I love the choices of the yellow and the red.
Yeah, they really do a great job of making those reds stand out every time it's on screen. You're like, it's just so vibrant.
Yeah, and we've got long takes. We have really great really great blocking of the actors, like where they're placed in the frame, and the way that this movie is lit it's so well lit. Obviously the costumes are great. Like, I really like, honestly, everything about this movie except for the storyline itself. I don't think the storyline is bad, but I also don't think it is original at all. I think I've seen this story told a million other times in a way that is better written in my opinion. And so yeah, I mean, I'm ultimately, like, this movie's fine. Like, I didn't hate it. I think the visuals really pulled through for me. If it wasn't for the visuals, and also you had mentioned James Newton Howard, I realized while listening to this that the main theme of this movie is actually in my film scores playlist, but I didn't even know it was from this movie. So yeah, I think artistically this film is very strong, but in terms of, like, the writing and the story itself, I'm not the biggest fan, but I also think that those are the things that are the most heavily M. Night Shyamalan-esque, which does not work for me no matter what he makes. So it's just not for me for some reason. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I watched it. I'm sure that you can dig things out of me in terms of like things to say about this film. But like off the top of my head, my brain's kind of just like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, like, you're talking about the twists. I mean, I think that's one thing that like really especially hurt it at the time, but is also, I won't say a flaw, but maybe not one of the stronger elements of it, is that people going into it were going into it with the expectation of M. Night Shyamalan is the guy with the twists. This movie's gonna have a twist, gotta figure out what it is, like, gotta see if it shocks me or not. And so you're framing everything around, what is the twist gonna be? Is this twist gonna work for me or not? And to me, that is not the right way to watch the movie. I think the movie works so much better when you go in not only just knowing the twist, but being able to watch everything with that knowledge of what has led to this, what is the full context. Like, because to me, this movie is a sort of tragedy, like romantic drama, but also a tragedy about people who have allowed their grief to close them off from the world, and then have created these like belief systems and ritual systems that cause them to transmit that grief and that isolation down to the next generation, and just create this constant atmosphere of fear that does not need to exist. And then these younger generation are trying to find some way to get through it or even escape it. And the movie ends in this way where they're not going to escape it. The myths about the creatures have been reinforced, and the village is going to continue as it was for some undefinable amount of time after that. Like, that's how the movie ends. And so
that's interesting. That's not how I thought the movie ended at all.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, that's certainly my reading. And I think there's something really interesting and really bleak about that. And again, like, I don't know, I don't have any specific notes about like, oh, the twist should have been revealed earlier, this should have been moved around here, or what should change about it. I just do think the structure of going in thinking this is a twist movie it does not do the movie favors for what the movie is actually trying to say, or where the movie actually ends up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I will say that's not the perspective I had going
Yeah,
into
so
this
what was your perspective about the ending of this movie?
Well, okay, so I want to comment first, like, I did not go into this movie being like, what's the twist gonna be? I was just kind of like, I'm gonna watch the movie. I know there's gonna be a twist. I'm not particularly like excited about it, so whatever. I also like literally knew what the twists were before they even happened. Like, so I wasn't even like, what's the twist gonna be? I was like, oh, okay, like, I'm watching the movie. These creatures aren't real. They're probably made up. And then I'm like, oh, look at that. They're not real and they're made up. And I was like, and even from like the very beginning of the movie, I was like, oh, this is a cult movie. So they're probably in this convent somewhere and they're stuck in time and it's not real. Like, I thought that in the first 10 minutes. And then I was like, took you long enough to get there. Like, it's just, again, I feel like I've seen this movie many, many other times, like a myriad of other times. So like, I knew what the movie was from the very beginning. So anyway, I just want to put it out there. Like, I did not go into this with the intrigue of like, what's the twist gonna be? Because I just...
Right, yeah. I'm more talking about the reception at the time.
Yeah, like, I could predict the movie from the very beginning. The ending, my perspective was, well, I also think it's... Maybe if I were to do more research on it, there is a straight answer to this. But my interpretation was at the end, when he kind of proposes like, hey, so-and-so has... presented us with an opportunity to continue this like belief system that we've created. Is this something that we all want to do? And the only thing that happens after he says that is everybody stands up. And in my mind, that standing up could mean we're continuing this or we're not. Like, we don't know what them, like, they're obviously all voting in one direction. But in my mind, we didn't know which direction it went.
Oh, interesting. To me, it was very clear they were voting, we're going to continue.
Interesting. Yeah, my vote was like, again, like, maybe we project what we want to see. But in my opinion, it felt very ambiguous. And so my thought was like, well, I would hope that it's something where they kind of tell all of the young people what's going on and they can choose whether or not they want to stay or go, because it seemed like they reached this point where they recognize like, hey, it's really a tragedy that we're having all of these people die of illness when they could very easily be saved, all for the sake of what? Like, we're trying to protect people, but we're also killing them in the sake of protecting them. Like, so I don't know. That was kind of my takeaway from the end. Like, I personally was voting for, they're going to tell everybody about it and then they can choose. But that was my own personal vote. But I also think it was left ambiguous. That's my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's just a disconnect between what the audience is supposed to be hoping for versus what is going to happen. And I think that tension is something that I really like. I think to me, it was pretty clear that the elders are just, maybe Edward Walker, the William Hurt character, is clearly the most starting to rethink what they've been doing, but it seems like all of the other elders are pretty set on, no, we've got to continue to see this through. This is our one chance to try and remake the world, and we can't let anything get in the way of that.
But why do you think that? They don't say anything. Like, I'm not arguing. My question is just like, I feel like you seem to be so solidly like, it's very clear what the ending is, whereas I see it as being more ambiguous. So I'm curious, like, what on your end communicates that, with a lot of certainty, it seems very clear that this is the direction that the vote went in.
Well, as you said, when he says this, and he's clearly leaving it to some sort of vote, they all start to stand up. And in, like, my interpretation of body language, if they had disagreed, they would have either stayed sitting or they would have left. Or like said, like, no, this is too much, or something like that. Standing is, to me, like, here I am, I'm at your service, we're gonna keep going. It's an affirmative gesture.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, but one of the things I like about this movie is there's tension, there's ambiguity.
Well, I just find it fascinating that, like, to you it's so certain that that's what the interpretation is, and I'm like, but it's so open-ended. Like, no one's saying anything. Them standing up could mean anything. Like, I just find that fascinating that to you it's so clear. I want to look up. I want to look up, like, did M. Night Shyamalan, like, intend it to be this is a clear ending, or did he intend it to be ambiguous? Because
it's a good question. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if he's spoken at it at some point, but I didn't go looking into his interviews.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue. I just found that to be. Yeah, interpretations of art are very...
Yeah, I love every time it's like, oh, it seemed like it could only be one way, but maybe here's another way to look at it. I love it when that happens.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've been kind of dancing around the ending, but let's go ahead and talk about the full movie, talk a little bit about the plot in a little bit more detail. So should have said this up front, but I think it's probably assumed for all of our episodes. Spoilers for The Village. If you don't want to hear spoilers, then stop listening and go watch it.
I feel like we already just completely spoiled it.
We already 100% completely spoiled it. Sorry. Anyway, so this movie, there are technically two twists that happen at two separate times toward the end. First is that the creatures that the village is scared of are not actually real. There's a circle of elders who we see meeting several times throughout the film, who are kind of the oldest people in the village, the village founders. What we discover is that sometime in, like, seems to be maybe like the 1970s, 1980s, they all got together because they were in some sort of grief counseling group because they had all lost someone. Their feeling was the evils of this world are too much for us to bear. So we need to move to start a new community and cut off all contact with the outside world and try and basically make our own utopia, hide away from our griefs, hide away from the evils of the world. And to do that, they create this myth of these creatures who live in this forest in reality, they all live in a like wildlife preserve that's blocked off. But so the creatures are, most of the time when we see the creatures in the film, it's one of the elders who puts on this like creature suit, who walks around and scares people.
Who made the suit? That's my question.
Maybe one of the
Who made
elders
it?
was a costume designer. But yeah, so that's the first twist. The creatures are not real. The second twist is what I already said, that it's not actually the 19th century, that it's actually the present day, but they've been forcing the entire village to live as if it's the 19th century. They don't have medicine, they don't have electricity, they don't have, access to the internet or phone lines or anything like that. They're just completely living this sort of, Amish lifestyle, basically, but without the knowledge or consent of the younger generation of people who just think that that's actually, when they live. Interesting little fact, I vividly remember this from the time. There was a criticism of this movie because of alleged similarities to a 90s YA book called Running Out of Time by Margaret Peterson. People accused M. Night Shyamalan of having ripped off the premise of that book. And I actually remember reading the book at the time because I'd liked the movie and I was kind of curious about it. To be honest, the bare bones setup is similar. It's like an isolated village that turns out to be set in the modern day, and a girl has to go outside and get medicine. But apart from that, basically everything is different. It's like a Truman Show-esque kind of setup there, where it's like cameras and people who are watching it and thinking it's a historic reproduction village. And a lot of the book takes place outside the village while the girl's like trying to get away from bad guys and find allies and stuff like that. So very different vibes. I don't think the plagiarism allegations have any foundation, but
they sound very different.
But yeah. From my memory, I mean, it's been a really long time since I read the book, but from my memory, they are very different. It's kind of a Hunger Games battle royale situation where it's like the kernel of an idea, but it's not a hard idea to come up with, and then everything about the way it's executed is very different. Yeah. Let's see. Oop. Oh, sorry. So one thing we have not...
How dare you?
No, my table is like... I'm just on a little card... My microphone's on just a little like card table that is not very sturdy.
Do you still not have a desk?
No, I still don't have a desk. I'm
Man.
Been looking around, but I really want the right thing. I don't want like just a cheap desk that's gonna wiggle and fall apart in 10 minutes, I want to get a good one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we can ask our podcast listeners to send in money.
Yeah. They're so gripped by this details into our lives. So one very important element of this story that we've not talked about yet, which in my opinion is probably the movie's biggest flaw, is the character of Noah, who's played by Adrian Brody. I am not a fan of this character or this performance. I sort of understand narratively why it helps the story, like makes sense.
I don't think it does.
But I think it should have been done without. So basically, Adrian Brody is playing a character named Noah, who is a mentally disabled character. He's like an adult, but he's mentally disabled. He's kind of regarded by the villagers as like, they don't really pay too close attention to him. He's often like playing with the children, sometimes violently, we find out. And it turns out that he is the one who has been first like catching and skinning the animals and freaking everybody out. And then later we discover that he has found out about the creature costumes. And so he's been putting them, he definitely puts one on at the end when Ivy is going through the forest. She thinks it's a real creature, but it's actually Noah in a suit. And
can I jump in and ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. This is something you want to talk about later, but I did not understand how he died.
So it's like this deep, I guess like a sinkhole in the forest. Oh,
okay. Yeah. It looked like she'd done something and I was like, wait, did she attack him? Now he's dead?
No,
like, what happened?
It is little. No, if you remember when she's going through the forest, she suddenly comes upon this sinkhole, which she almost falls into, because she can't see it, but she manages to climb out. But she knows where it is.
He fell into the same hole.
Yeah. So what she did was, when she realized that she was back close to the sinkhole, because, you know, she could feel that stump that's right next to it, so she knew where she was. She basically waited on the edge of it for the creature, not knowing that it was Noah, to charge at her. When it came close, she got out of the way. The creature falls into the hole. And presumably Noah, like, broke his neck or something like that.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. I was
no problem.
I just, maybe it's because I so I was whenever I watch horror movies, I always have the website Jump the Scare pulled up because it gives you the timestamps of all of the jump scares. So I closed my eyes during that part. So I just closed them, then I opened them, and he was dead.
Gotcha.
And I was like, wait, where is he? What happened?
Yeah, that's what happened. Which is why, you know, because she is blind, she knows that there's a creature out in the woods. She's been told that the creatures are not real, but now there's what seems like an actual creature charging at her. She's going to come home and think that there are still actually creatures out there, potentially never even realizing that it was Noah who was killed, instead of a creature. So anyway,
sorry, I took you on a tangent.
Oh
sorry.
yeah, no worries. But yeah, so Noah is kind of the source of some of what appear to be the creature's happenings. But then Noah is also the character who commits a violent crime, which seems to be the first violent crime this village has experienced, which is that he is jealous over the fact that Lucius and Ivy are in love. He has a thing for Ivy, and so he stabs Lucius several times. And it's not the greatest choice to have a ambiguously mentally disabled character be sort of the quote-unquote source of evil in your village. It's not great. I wish it had been done differently. And I also really don't like Adrian Brody's performance. I maybe just I'm a little against Adrian Brody in general. But yeah, that to me is the major flaw in this movie, that every time I see it just rankles a little bit. I mean, to me, this movie is so much about the atmospherics and the dreaminess. It's not really about logic. It's not really about applying it to the real world. It's more about these ideas of, you know, grief and loss and fear and bravery, and just sort of putting you in a mood and a sense of place. You know, it's not about the details as much. And so it bothers me maybe a little less than something that was more grounded in reality, but it still bothers me.
Yeah, I think the character is obviously very important to the film in terms of, like, I think everything that this character does makes sense, and I don't have an issue with what the character does. I'm just like, I don't think it's necessary for this character to be mentally ill, and that just is I don't know. I just think it's just not the best choice. Not the best choice. So, yeah.
What are your thoughts on the characters of Ivy and Lucius and their relationship, but also them as individuals?
Well, first of all, I love Joaquin Phoenix. I know he's like kind of a whack job and problematic as a person. But I think maybe the first thing I saw him in when I was little was Gladiator. It was either Gladiator or Signs.
He's so good in Gladiator.
So good in Gladiator. But he's always been one of my favorite actors. He's so talented. And in this particular role, I think it just works really well. It's like it just feels like a well-fitted suit for him. I don't know. It just works really well with his face. And he's such a body language actor. In everything I've seen him in, he changes how he moves to accommodate whoever the character is. And I think, yeah, I really like him as Lucius in terms of the performance. The character of Lucius, I like. The only moment I didn't like him was, ironically, the quote that you chose for the beginning of this episode, because the part when he was like, "Why do you have to lead? I want to lead." I'm like, okay, all right, okay, step off, man. Like, your ego needs to calm down a little bit. I think as that monologue went on, I'm like, okay, I think this has more to do with he just doesn't like people telling him to speak.
Yeah.
But I just don't like how that's written to start out. Because when he first said that, I kind of checked out of the rest of the monologue. I was like, okay, man, like, no, I hate you now. But no, I think Lucius is an interesting character. I like that he's this kind of soft-spoken, like, brave. The quiet one is the bravest one, who's willing to go out and sacrifice himself. I do like his character. I like him with Ivy for sure. Obviously, I'm assuming everyone who watches this movie loves the moment when Judy Greer's character is like, I'm in love with you, and then he says no, and then she's immediately crying, and then she's immediately
the hard
with someone
cut to
else.
her
Like,
sobbing in bed
hard
is
cut.
so funny. It's
such a hard
so
cut.
funny.
I laughed quite hard. But yeah, I think the dynamic between Lucius and Ivy is really great. I always have this thought with movies where I always try and break them down, because I think that movies are like, so many decisions are not made out of nowhere. Like, they're intentional. And so whenever there is a blind person in a movie, I'm always like, okay, what is the purpose behind this? And sometimes it works for me and sometimes it doesn't. This is a movie where I think, just because of where I am mentally, there were a few things in this movie that I was like, I don't want to thematically try and figure this out. Like, her being blind, and also the significance of the red and the yellow. I was like, I'm sure if I analyze this, there's a reason, but my brain doesn't want to do it right now. So I can't necessarily speak to like the element of her that is the blind element, which I think is a huge part of her character, but that's just because my brain is too lazy at this point in my life. But I think the chemistry between them is very strong. And yeah, I don't know. For some reason, the lovey-dovey didn't make me want to vom as much as other movies do. It did kind of work for me. Because I feel like I had a sense that, like, this has been brewing for a long time. This whole idea of, like, you never touched my arm when we were younger. And, like, sometimes you don't do things because other people want you to do them because you know you want to do that. Like, it's just...
I love when he says that to his mother, and she's like, what nonsense are you talking
She's
about?
like, what? But then she experiences it for herself.
Oh,
and she's like, oh... Yeah. But anyway, I think I believe their relationship. I think they have good chemistry with one another. So yeah, my biggest complaint with Ivy, which is not my complaint with her, it's my complaint with movies in general, is when female characters are expected to cry all the time, especially when it's like, this is a strong female character, but she's also crying constantly. I'm like, women, there's nothing wrong with crying. There's nothing wrong with crying. But, like, she's crying this whole movie. And I'm like, can she just be a strong woman that's also not simultaneously crying? I don't know. But that's just a personal thing.
Wait. I mean, obviously she cries when she finds Joaquin Phoenix's, like, you know, body after the stabbing. But I'm trying to think of, like, and, you know, she's understandably freaked out when she's walking through the woods. But before that, is she crying a lot?
No, but ever since he gets hurt, like, literally the rest of the movie she's crying. The rest of the movie, like,
yeah, but she's in grief and she's absolutely terrified of being murdered.
All I'm saying is if that same performance was played by a man, he would not be crying the whole time.
Gotcha.
Because she's a woman, she cries the whole time.
She cries.
And if she was a man, he would not cry. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Fair enough. I mean,
it's not that I don't think that her crying is realistic. It's that I just don't like seeing women constantly crying the whole time, because I know that there's this patriarchal expectation that women will cry.
Gotcha.
Anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my own baggage I'm bringing into this.
It felt very emotionally true to me, but maybe in the way of, like, if it was a man, realistically, he would be crying in that situation. It's more unrealistic not to cry.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's not the fact that she's crying. It's the fact of, like, the dynamic that it's the Hollywood system that it exists in is what's problematic for me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I really love their dynamic, their romance. I mean, their romance was, to me, the thing that first connected me to this movie, is that I really connected to like that, their relationship, that element of it, and then other elements later drew me in. But I don't know, I really love the that dynamic of, like, the stoic, reserved guy and then the girl who won't stop yapping. Like, it's just so cute to me. And I think they perform it really well. I believe it wasn't Bryce Dallas Howard's like first movie, because she's had like cameos in several of her father's films. But it was very early in her career. It's definitely like, I'm pretty sure it was her first leading role. And I think she's really, really wonderful in this. You know, she's very sort of open. She has this very strong personality, but also has a lot of emotionality and vulnerability. When her father talks about like, he says something about like this idea of leadership and kind of being someone that people can look to. And you really believe that for her, like despite her disability, you know, her blindness, like you really believe her as this really strong personality that people in the village respect and are able to kind of look to. Yeah, I really love her performance. I love Joaquin Phoenix's performance. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say the more movies that I see with Bryce Dallas Howard in them, because I've seen her in a fair amount of things at this point, it will never not crack me up that the first thing I saw her in was Twilight. Like, that was my exposure to her as Victoria. And then when I realized that like she had a career before that and she like does other things, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Because in my brain she only existed in that world, because so many actors in that movie only exist in that world.
Well, she wasn't even the original Victoria. She's brought in for the second movie. Yeah
There is no Victoria in New Moon. She comes back for
You're
Eclipse.
right. Yeah
New Moon is all about mopey fella. mopey There's no real tension in that movie aside from a love like not
we
even
need to do the rest of the Twilight series together. We had so much fun with the first one.
We did. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Good time. Anyway, I think I kind of exhausted that train of thought. I have always thought it
okay.
Yeah. I have always thought it really interesting how, again, with, you know, how good the sort of art direction, color design in this movie is. You know, the bad color, which is red, is so vibrant. Right. The good color is this sort of like muted mustardy yellow that keeps it away. Ivy, the character, as does Bryce Dallas Howard, the actress, has this bright red hair, which I don't know what the symbolism is in that exactly, but I just find it kind of interesting. I mean, I can't imagine that was the reason that she was cast, but the fact that they decided not to dye it and they left it is really interesting. Like this little hint of like, maybe red is not all that bad, or, you know, maybe there's more ambiguity to this world than we know of.
But also blood is red, and blood is
red. Yeah. I mean, that's the very like simple, but, you know, powerful symbolism of red being the bad colors. Like, blood is red. We don't want blood in this village. If someone is bloody, something has gone very wrong, which is what happens in the movie. Yellow being the color of like, I don't know, it's interesting that they choose yellow as opposed to like blue or green or something like that. It's such a distinct color palette that it creates. Yellow is also obviously like, you know, if someone's a coward, we call them yellow, you know, like that's like a phrase we use. And I don't know what other associations you could make, but yeah, I don't know. It's such a distinct, like the yellow cloaks that they have are just so distinct looking. I also really love the creature design here and the way it's sort of humanoid, but with the spikes and the sort of horse-like, goat-like face thing with the tusks and everything. Like, I don't know, it works really, like, I can sort of believe it as like, you know, you put a little bit of money, you make a creature suit, and then it just looks really creepy walking around in the background, you know?
I thought it was hilarious because,
really?
Again, like, I knew from the beginning that the creatures weren't real. And so the first time I saw it standing at the door, I kind of was like, that's a hilarious suit. It's got sticks sticking out the back. Like, what? And then I really liked the shots of it when it looked more so of just like this big red cloak and with this like dark black interior. But once you got to the details of like the face and the fingers, and I was like, okay, now that just looks like a paper mache, like someone just like, not that I could make something like that. In that sense, it's quite impressive.
Right.
But it kind of lost the like the fantastical intrigue or like eerie aspect. It was just kind of like, oh, that's a shitty costume. But like when it was farther away and it was just the deep red and the silhouette, I thought that was stunning.
Well, it works, in my opinion, it works so well in what I think is the best sequence and the best shot in the movie, which is when the creature is like walking around the village. I think the assumption is that this is the elders trying to kind of regain some sort of control over the creature legend, and so it's one of the elders in the costume walking around. But Ivy is out by the door with her hand out because she knows Lucius is still out there and he's going to come for her. And her sister's like, get underground. And there's just this gorgeous shot of her hands like out in the like cold night air, and the creature is coming up out of the shadows, kind of in out of focus. And then finally Lucius like reaches out and grabs her hand and pulls her inside, and James Newton's score is going off like crazy. And it's just, I love that sequence. I think it's just so beautifully done.
Roger Deakins, James Newton Howard, and whoever the costume designer is,
and
MVPs,
Roth, yeah, another
MVPs of this film. Without them bringing it, this movie would not work.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, but I think the one thing that really connects all of M. Night Shyamalan's movies, and even I haven't seen The Happening, so I can't speak to that one, or Avatar: The Last Airbender, but Lady in the Water, which is a bad movie, it looks beautiful. It is beautifully kind of blocked and composed. Like, I think if nothing else, he has flaws, sometimes significant flaws as a storyteller, but he's an incredible visual stylist. And I think that's, that's not nothing. There's a reason that with The Sixth Sense, people were talking about him as like potentially the next Spielberg.
Maybe he needs to just collaborate with a different writer or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he writes a lot of his own movies, but maybe I don't know if he has like frequent co-writers that he works with, or if everything is on his own. I mean, maybe it's just the strength too of like what he chooses to write about. One of the things that I think works well with his style about this movie is the fact that no one talks like a real person somewhat works for the premise, because these are 21st century people cosplaying as 19th century people, and so they're trying to create the sort of old-timey sounding dialogue that they imagine would have happened, but it doesn't quite fit. And then their children are, picking up on that. And so like any like, why are you saying it like that? can kind of be excused away by what the premise is.
Yeah. The only person off the top of my head that I actually like when they make things where the characters don't talk like real people, David Lynch.
Oh,
that's the only, off the top of my head, that's the only like auteur who has that as a consistent theme in their projects where it actually works for me.
I mean, I would make an argument that Wes Anderson is also one where characters don't talk like normal people, but it works so well for his style. I think even, the Coen brothers, like the way they talk in these really florid yet sort of circular ways, like, it works so well with what they're doing. It's not naturalistic, but it's perfect for their style. Yeah. Let me see. I mean, I'm kind of coming to the end of the things that I wanted to talk about, but I guess I just wanted to like mention again, like how the more I watch this movie, especially as I get older, the more distinct and I think meaningful and relevant that theme is of the way fear of the other, of the outside, is passed down from one generation to another, and how grief for some people can be used as this excuse to put up walls and create barriers to the outside world, versus for some other characters within this movie, grief is the thing that pushes them forward. Like, I found it something that I had missed every other time I'd watched it, and I only picked up on this time, probably because I had the subtitles on, is at the beginning of the movie, after Lucius goes to the elders for the first time and asks for permission to go through the woods and get medicines, he has the scene where he talks to Brendan Gleeson, who is one of the elders who, at the very beginning of the film, he has just lost his son, who is only like 7 years old. And we learn he had lost him to illness. And Brendan Gleeson mentions to Joaquin Phoenix, like, I know that you and my son, were friends. Like, you both had this similarity. You were both kind of quiet and reserved, but like you clearly had this sort of connection to each other. And so knowing that Joaquin Phoenix is like the first thing that's motivating him is this person who I really cared for, this child who I had this friendship with has died. And that is leading me to want to face not only any, fears that have been instilled to me about the forest, but also all of this social pressure not to do anything, to face all of that and try and go and, make some sort of attempt to prevent this from ever happening to someone else. I think that's really beautiful, and it is the thing that makes him stand out among everyone else in the village. He is this kind of weirdo outsider because he doesn't, this like fear and this social pressure that everyone else has been socialized under, it hasn't affected him in the same way, or it hasn't been as strong for him.
He's the one who holds the record of standing there with his back to the forest.
Which baby Jesse Eisenberg, by the way, baby Fran Kranz, they are doing this. Yeah.
So many babies in this movie.
I know, so many babies. Yeah.
I genuinely wonder, like, is Jesse Eisenberg like literally just Mark Zuckerberg from The Social Network? Like, is he even acting in that movie? I don't know. Also, I wanted to say one thing and then ask another question. I found it to be so strange to see Sigourney Weaver as this like gentle, like
motherly
woman who's like scared about being in love. But I was like, this is so weird. I don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable. Like, I don't know. It was just so odd to see her in that role. And I was like, is she giving a bad performance, or am I just like so not liking her in this role? And I think it's the latter, but it was very strange.
Oh, it was funny. I liked her, but I mean, she's kind of doing the same. She's on the same wavelength as everyone else, which is like a little bit weird and inhuman.
I think it was just weird to see her doing it. I was like, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
I didn't like William Hurt's performance. I thought everyone else, I believed them in terms of like, you're just living in a place where you talk kind of weird, but I guess it makes sense in this context. He feels like he's playing a character to me. I'm not convinced that he's actually a real person here. It just doesn't seem like, I don't know, his delivery of the lines just doesn't feel like it fits into this movie for me. So
I think I agree with you. I haven't seen a whole lot of William Hurt roles, but from what I have seen, I feel like he just kind of talks a little bit weird normally. I mean, like, it's not weird if that's his normal way of talking, but it's just a very distinct way of talking. And I do feel like, I agree that it fits this least of all. It definitely feels like it's someone who's doing it like, oh, here's my like, high school role as this character.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Okay, I have a question. Do you have empathy, or do you empathize at all with like the elders of this community? Like, what are your feelings towards those people, the decisions that they've made, and all of that? Like, what are your feelings towards them? Yeah,
no, that's an excellent question, because I do, like, I understand, and I think it's a very human thing to be like, I have experienced this grief that is so intense, and the only way that I can think of to prevent that happening, especially for like my children, for the next generation, I don't want them to go through what I go through, is to hide yourself away. I think that's a very like human and understandable reaction. The problem is that it's the wrong one. And so yeah, I have empathy for them. I just think that they're wrong, and every decision they've made is just kind of dug themselves in deeper. And I mean, like, the fact of these events shows how wrong-headed it is. You can't block out evil from the world. As long as there are people, there is going to be evil. Like, that's just the way it is, and yet they have so many opportunities to turn back, and they, by the end, I think, could be ambiguous, but it seems like they're not going to. So I don't see them as villains, I guess I should say. I have empathy for them. I don't see them as villains, but I think they're making the wrong decision. And I think it has really bad consequences for, for their children and for the long-term health of the community overall.
Yeah, hearing you saying you can't escape the evils of the world no matter what you do, that was kind of my interpretation of blood being the bad color. Is just kind of like hurt and pain exists within your body because that's what it means to be a human being. And even if you think that that's not true, one day your body is going to force you to recognize, like, hey, there's pain and hurt in this world inside of you, and you can't run away from it and you can't escape it. And yeah, I see what you're saying. And I think to a certain extent, like, I do understand where the parents are coming from. I think every parent, I've given discussions I've had with my parents, my aunts and uncles, and like my sister and peers who have kids. Part of being a parent is like wanting better for your children than what you had. And in that sense, I understand that, like, if they all experience these tragedies, they wanted to create something better. But I also think that, especially getting to this point, if they are seeing that their decisions are causing people to die, I'm like, you guys are adults. Like, you need to be doing something about this. You can't just stand by and watch people die because you don't want to expose them to the outside world. Like, that just bothers me. And I just think, even if you want to maintain the society, you can still have a runner that goes out and gets medication. Like, the fact that you guys are so afraid, you're not even just protecting your children anymore. You've just created this world that you yourself are terrified to leave. And so it's like, you are letting your own fears, like, not even indirectly, but directly harm the people that you're trying to protect. And I think, going back to what I said in the beginning, I do think that the ending is ambiguous. I don't think that there's a clear answer of what the decision is that they make. But my hope is that these people are choosing, like, hey, we are going to tell people what's going on, and they can choose whether or not they want to stay or leave. We can choose whether we stay. They can choose whether they stay. It really seems like their minds are opening up, and I would like to exist in a world where people recognize their mistakes, even in their attempts to protect people, and they readjust the way that they view the world when necessary. And so I understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, I'm like, you have a responsibility as a parent to continue to grow and learn and change and adapt to whatever is happening to your children. And I think that that's true in the real world as well. And it frustrates me when parents don't do that. So yeah, I mean, again, I think the ending is ambiguous. I'm definitely projecting my own.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's
interpretation onto that, but
it's definitely intentional ending at that point where it seems like it could go another way, but there's the possibility that it could go another. And so you can kind of project your own hopes onto it.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that I was just curious to hear your thoughts on that, because I wasn't sure if you like landed on one side specifically of I hate them or they're guiltless and they're totally fine. I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah. I mean, the thing that's like, again, it's like you're getting there through really human and understandable, because of really human and understandable experiences and emotions. But there's something so monstrous in keeping people in this situation because of a lie, keeping them in a constant state of fear because of a lie, not giving them the choice to decide, do you want to be part of this community or don't you? Like, if tomorrow they decide we're going to tell everyone that the monsters are a hoax and give them the option, we're going to continue this community, but if you want to leave, you can leave. Like, some people are going to leave. Some people would probably choose to stay because they don't, know what's out there. But they're not even given that option, And I think too, you'd asked about like the choice to have Ivy be blind. I only picked up on this time. It's not super clear, so I might be reading a little bit into it, but it seems like she was not born blind. It was due to some sort of illness she had, which means that, again, her disability, her blindness is a result, like a living result of the fact that they are intentionally excluding the world. She has to live with this disability because of the fact that they weren't willing to go for medicines that could have helped her. Obviously, others have died because of their unwillingness to go back on their oath, to rethink what they have set in motion. So
I would also like to ask, I'm assuming this is not the case, but if we have any listeners at all that are park rangers, please tell me what your stock of medicine is at your wherever your lodge or cottage is that's your headquarters, because for some reason I find it very doubtful that they have an entire fridge just full of like any type of medication that you might need for any scenario. I mean, he's been stabbed multiple times. Like he's probably going to need a blood transfusion. Like, there's a massive stash inside of this refrigerator, and he's like pretending to eat and I was like, this very well might be realistic, but it also very well might not. I think in the context of this movie, it doesn't matter, but it just made me think about it. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not normal, but is it?
I don't know. I mean, they say it's for like animal bites and stuff. I don't know what the normal amount of medication. I'm assuming having medication on hand because if people might get stung by, bitten by snakes or like step on a rusty nail or something like that is pretty normal. I don't know if that's the normal amount of they did have a lot.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the quantity. Like it makes sense that they have it, but that much?
Can I just say it really did make me laugh so hard. The really awkward exposition dump that M. Night Shyamalan gives while that guard is awkwardly going to get the medicine. He's like, oh, just keep your head down because, people are curious about the fact that we have to maintain this border and no one's allowed to go in and out. And also government have been paid off to prevent people from flying over this thing. It's just like so awkward.
Ugh, yeah.
Oh, it's so bad. Also, is this malpractice for this ranger to meet a like injured, like disabled woman in 19th century garb who doesn't seem to understand like what's going on or what a car is and asks for medicine, and then you're just like, all right, I'll get you some medicine, let you back on your way, and will not report, no further questions. Like,
yeah, I
it
mean,
seems pretty like, I would hope someone would be like, at least just check in with headquarters, make sure that seems okay.
Yeah, I mean, isn't the last shot of him just sitting in his truck or something? I'm like,
yeah, just kind of looking in shock.
Maybe he just gave her medicine to hold her over, but he's like, I'm still going to call somebody. I don't know.
I hope
seem like he will, but I'm like, you never know. Maybe he does.
Well, he's so secretive about getting the medicines out of the thing. Makes me think that like maybe he's not supposed to. I don't know. It's just a little bit like he's awfully accommodating for this extremely weird situation.
Yeah. He jumps on board pretty quick.
Anyway, all right, so that's all that I had to talk about. Did you have any last notes or questions or anything like that?
I don't think so. I just thought the rocks were funny.
The magic rocks.
Yeah, she went into the wilderness really with these two guys and was like, the rocks will protect
They're like,
us.
Why haven't we heard about these rocks?
And then the second he leaves, she's like, yeah, those aren't real.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. That was like,
yeah,
it was a good thought by her, honestly.
I guess, yeah, it just shows how naive these people are and how sheltered they are. The fact that they think that, like, yeah, just take these rocks and they'll
solve everything.
Keep the creatures away.
Oh, we didn't tell you about those magic rocks? Yeah, we've been saving them for a rainy day.
Sorry, well, you never asked.
Yeah, it's true.
You mean we never asked if there were magic rocks that repelled the creatures?
Yeah. Which, by the way, speaking of, like, to return to your point about gender roles, I found it really interesting. I wasn't like diving too deeply into this, but I found it really interesting that like in this town, the elder board is made up of men and women, and they seem to have equal power. But then at the same time, there does seem to be some preservation of gender roles where it's like the daughter has to ask her father's permission before she can get married, that sort of thing. So I was just kind of curious about like, how would like middle-aged people who were living in, who were kind of younger in the 1970s and 80s and then had the opportunity to set up a fake 19th century town. Like, what sort of practices would you carry over and what sort would you not,
Depends. Were they hippies? Were they?
That's a great question. I mean, Edward Walker definitely was. He was a history professor at UPenn.
That's true.
And an heir, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. So, awards and legacy. This movie did not win.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I just. Never mind. I don't think. No, never mind.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Awards. So this movie did receive 1 Oscar nomination for Best Original Score. Well deserved, in my opinion. Did not win. I didn't look up what actually did win.
What was nominated for Best Cinematography this year?
Oh, wait, that is a great question.
Should have been nominated because it has. I mean, like I said before, it's got impeccable lighting, color palettes, color correction, camera movements, long takes, blocking of what?
I'll look it up. Yeah, please do.
I'll look it up. You keep going.
Okay. So as I said, critical response at the time was a bit mixed. Metacritic currently has it at 44, and Rotten Tomatoes also has it at 44%. It did do pretty well at the box office, but it wasn't really beloved. Roger Ebert in particular gave it a 1-star review. He completely panned it. I read through his review, which, Geneva. What?
The Phantom of the Opera was nominated this year.
Oh my gosh. See our episode on the Phantom of the Opera.
Sorry to cut you off, but I just saw that and was like, oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Wait, what won?
The Aviator.
Okay. Yeah.
The Passion of the Christ was nominated for Best Cinematography.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen that. I think it has good cinematography.
And then A Very Long Engagement and House of Flying Daggers, neither of which I've heard of.
House of Flying Daggers I've heard of. And if it's the one I'm thinking of, it does look really beautiful. I think it's a Hong Kong film or maybe Japanese.
Do you think that the cinematography in Phantom of the Opera is better than this?
I don't say no.
So. I would also say no. Roger Deakins just banging his fist against the table.
Curse you, Joel Schumacher. Anyway, I would love to see Roger Deakins' version of Phantom of the Opera, like a version of Phantom of the Opera that Roger Deakins has worked on. I think that would be great.
That M. Night Shyamalan is also directing.
Oh my gosh. M. Night Shyamalan musical. Now there's an idea. Anyway, yeah. So Roger Ebert panned this movie. His review is very entertaining to read because he's a great writer. I don't agree with his criticisms, obviously, but it is a fun review. But anyway, as I mentioned before, sorry, my voice is starting to go. In recent years, this movie has had some people reappraising it and, really pointing out things that were not really discussed at the time. Some have even called it M. Night Shyamalan's best film. So I took a snippet from an article or essay written by Emily St. James in Vox. She says she calls it M. Night Shyamalan's best film. She says that it is, her interpretation is that it's grappling with the American psyche in the wake of the Iraq War. And she writes, "The Village is a gothic romance filled with shadows, fog, and long stretches of earnest yearning. And Gothic romances are not stories that need logical consistency to thrive. Instead, they need thematic coherence, and that's where The Village shines. The desire to retreat into an imagined past in the wake of trauma is an understandable one, but The Village shows just how empty this idea ultimately is. It's a story about what happens when you abandon logic in the name of safety."
Can I say that if you look up this movie on Letterboxd, there are a lot of reviews of people expressing that this movie is underrated or misunderstood. The average rating of this movie on Letterboxd is still, I think, 3.5 stars or 3 stars or something like that. But a lot of the top reviews that are written by users are people saying this movie is very misunderstood and all of that. So
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. I intentionally didn't look at the Letterboxd reviews right after rewatching because I wanted to like talk about it first. So I'm going to go back and look at some of them. And then I pulled a second quote from a writer named Chris Evangelista for Slash Film. He calls the movie a fable for a post 9/11 world steeped in fear and confusion. And he says, "The Village is Shyamalan's most challenging film, a film from a man who usually embraces magic and the supernatural, telling the audience that they're on their own. It's easy to see why this turned some off, but now it's time to give it another chance. It's a beautiful, melancholy film that dares to end on a note that's simultaneously negative and hopeful, an ending not easily shrugged off or pushed aside."
All right.
So let's kind of sum up what I really like about the film. I think those are both good quotes. So, all right, yeah, final thoughts. I do really like this movie. I mean, like I've said, it is a flawed movie. I fully admit there are parts of it that I wish had been done differently or that I think are not as strong as they could be. But I think for a movie that is really, it's a movie that really shines in its atmosphere, in its creating of this sense of what it means to live under constant fear and dread, and the sort of moody, bleak, like we are trapped in the decisions that are made by the generations before us. We're trapped in grief. We're trapped in our own sort of heads. And the possibility of that maybe love and selfless sacrifice can break us out of it. But maybe it won't. We don't know. It just really sticks with me every time I rewatch it. So yeah. Final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I will just kind of finish with saying that this movie visually blows me away. I mean, it just every single shot, every single thing that I see on screen, the entire movie, all of it is just so well realized. And I don't know, I feel like I could just watch it without any dialogue with like just James Newton Howard's film score playing. This feels like a movie you could just put in a background if you want to just like set a vibe of some kind. Just put this on in the background.
It's another reason why this is like, to me, not only a great Halloween movie, but just sort of generally a great fall movie. Like there's a real sort of misty moodiness that works really well for those kind of fall evenings, you know?
Yeah, it's very fantastical and I love fantasy worlds, so it works for me. Yeah, and then as far as the story goes, like I think it's got some interesting ideas. I just don't think it's anything I haven't seen before. The cast is stacked. I think people do, for the most part, a good job with what they've got. I didn't hate it. This movie's fine. Those are kind of my final feelings.
I'm glad. Yeah, I'm happy about that. Yeah, so do you want to tell the people what we're going to be covering next episode?
Yes, we will be discussing a movie that I've been begging Geneva to watch ever since it was in theaters. And of course she hasn't seen it because she never listens to my recommendations until years later. Call back to Succession? No. But we are going to be watching Godzilla -1, which came out last year in very late 2023. And managed to snag one Oscar, which I was so happy for.
That's right. Oh, I completely forgot about that.
They had the best little cute little speech on stage. I loved it.
And they had all the like didn't they have like Godzilla their whole little Godzilla figurines? Oh my gosh, how did I forget about that? That's
it was so special. So yeah, we will be talking about Godzilla -1. Incredible film. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm very excited. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at yourpickpod@gmail.com. Our theme song was composed by Joel Rushton, and our podcast graphic was designed by Kara Shin. If you like this show and want to hear more, please rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We're excited to have you on this journey with us. Until next time.